So, even more war ethics. I've done, 3 videos so far on it, and this is just today. And there are more to come, actually, I'm just doing it every hour or so. So again, I'm talking about war ethics, and today I am talking about Greece. So, in the Greek tradition, war comes under a bit of a polychotomy. When we discuss Greece today, and when a lot of people reference ancient Greece, they reference it as if it were just this huge unified state, the way it is today, as a nation. But back in those days, it wasn't the, amalgamation of states, or the conglomerate that we know it as today. It was about 1,500 city-states that were constantly changing. Large bundle. And these probably nowadays wouldn't be classified as any more than cities, or a lot of them towns. So we're going to go over the different Greek war ethics, because again, they differ a lot. Now first, the two that everyone knows, the two city-states that everyone knows and everyone has an idea about. That's Athens and Sparta. Now there are some other ones I'm going to cover at a later date, not today. Corinth is an interesting one, but I think Athens and Sparta are a good place to start because everyone knows them and everyone has an idea of how they operate. Now, Sparta is very much seen as warlike, and the idea of war ethics, it actually really doesn't match up for a lot of people in their mind to these two states, Athens and Sparta. Sparta, in a lot of people's minds, is seen as a state which had effectively no law, designed to crush people. They were huge meatheads that went off and just basically raged throughout the ancient Greek world, causing war wherever they went. Well, no, that's not true. They were far more codified in their system, and Athens is seen as this lovely, civilized, democratic place. But in reality, they were pretty harsh at times. They employed war a lot. They had an incredibly powerful navy and a pretty decent set of war ethics on their own. But nonetheless, we can agree that these are different. When we think of Sparta, or when a lot of people think of Sparta, they think of meatheads, super soldiers, trained in battle to be a benefit to the nation. And both Sparta and Athens fought in a lot of wars, but Sparta's entire culture was based around war. And this was for a few reasons. First off, obviously, you want to be able to defend Sparta. You want to be able to do the best you can to defend the people, to defend the lifestyle, the state, and also you want to be able to provide for the nation. So if there's something you have to do in order to make sure Sparta is secure, which it often was because it's a pretty beautiful place, surrounded geopolitically, quite secure because it's surrounded by sort of mountain range. But the main reason that Spartan armies trained so hard, the reason that it was such a military army culture, was basically because they employed a lot of slaves. They had the helot class. The helot class is the underclass for Spartan society. And the idea is that everyone can go off and fight and, basically do what they want, and the helots go tend to the farms. They take care of the stuff that the Spartans don't necessarily want to, and Spartans can focus on what is culturally right, what a Spartan man and woman should be doing, what they should be learning. And the idea of training was largely to quell helot uprisings, if there ever were helot uprisings, which eventually they did come around from time to time, and the Spartans did often crush them. Spartan war ethics, beyond this idea of the helot class, because that was, if there was a helot uprising, the helots were treated awfully. It was effectively not a free-for-all, but there was no real ethical code to what they could do. It was effectively, in the most ordered manner possible, crush whatever uprising came. But for war external to Sparta, for the defense of Sparta, they had a certain set of values, as it were. The first is that each man, as you know, is a fighting force for Sparta itself, an asset to the state to be used in a military sense. Spartan war ethics, they appeal to obedience and courage and duty. And it is this duty that effectively compels Spartans to go and fight. It's not simply that they choose to fight, it's something enshrined within their law. I think there's an inscription somewhere near
Thermopylae that Thucydides wrote about, which is basically saying that Spartan men went and, they should be proud because they followed Spartan law, which is to go into battle to defend, their homeland, the city-state of Sparta. And the idea is that there is an obligation to go to war to defend Sparta, to protect the way of life that Sparta has, because Sparta is, of course, a pure culture. Spartan men are the strongest, the most incredible superweapons on land that the world has ever seen at the time, the most incredible soldiers. Spartan women were also incredibly strong. Everyone was really quite intelligent because they were well educated, including Spartan women for the time. Spartan women could own businesses and were basically the vessel really, really respected for producing more super soldiers effectively. And so everybody had to be incredibly competent in the society. It didn't matter who you were, you had to be incredibly competent. Athens, on the other hand, doesn't focus on this militaristic culture. We have this idea, or a lot of people do, that Athens is purely the base of democracy. It's a place of culture, of beautiful religion, of discussion, of philosophy. Oh, how nice. The fact of the matter is that for perhaps some of the, aristocracy, like Plato, let's say, particularly in the earlier or the mid-course of Athens' history, basically the aristocracy were free to participate in a lot of democracy, philosophy, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, there were still very restrictive laws. And it was not quite the, kind, civilized place that a lot of people consider it to be. Only for a few people, or a certain few people who were Athenian citizens. For those who were outside of Athens, they were not treated so well. Athens, when going to war, appeals to a few ethics, or a few principles in doing so, which is fear, honor, and interest. Athens had a pretty huge empire, which it acquired not necessarily through conquest, but through aiding in the war against Persia, really. And they built up this really huge empire, and, once they had it, they sort of had it, and they said, well, that's tough, we have it now. And obviously they now need to command this empire. And they need to do this, largely in a harsh way, because there are a lot of states that don't necessarily want to comply. And so that's where the fear comes in. Athens was an incredibly economically prosperous place. It had the ability to crush a lot of its, vassal states within its empire, within its league. And it had a hugely powerful navy. It had a lot of countries, a lot of other vassal states which stood behind it, which were ready to effectively crush any uprising states. So we do see a similarity there in that Athens perhaps doesn't train, but really focuses a lot on not allowing those that participate with it. For the Spartans, it's the Helots, and for the Athenians, it's the people of their vassal states that they rule. They have to appeal to fear because they are a huge power. They have to sort of appeal to honor as well, because Athens basically puts a very high status on honor. They don't see themselves as conquerors. They see themselves as heroes, saviors, because that was basically the way that they gained their empire. Horace writes a lot about this. And also interest. They choose to appeal to logic a lot, because obviously you need to coerce these states into doing stuff. Athens wasn't necessarily as kindly and civilized as people think. They had this huge, terrifying navy, the power of an entire empire, loads of soldiers, states to back up their power, and this huge economic prosperity that basically meant they had a lot of freedom to do what they want. Nonetheless, despite their more hawkish view in commanding the entry of war, they had to believe that Athens had a stake, had interest, had honor in going to war, and then commanded other nations to do so based upon their interest and fear and compelling them to be honorable. But nonetheless, we do see that within war, there is an adoption of perhaps more merciful elements. So it wasn't so much employed, but there is the idea of Aristotelian war ethics, which, again, it wasn't necessarily so employed, but it is still Greek. It is still technically Athenian war ethics. Aristotle claims that war should be a last resort, and a means by which to restore peace, as it were. And because he has this idea of telos in the world, telos, where there is a certain order in the world, he claims that war is best in self-defense, and that's the best way to bring order to the world. It shouldn't be conquering. It's not to enslave others, but to prevent the enslavement of yourself and your people. And this is probably best encapsulated with the Athenian idea of honor. But of course, this wasn't always followed. Nonetheless, the development of the ideas which continued from the Aristotelian legacy, as it were, of course largely influenced Aquinas, because Aristotle had an enormous effect on him. And that manifests itself today, because Aquinas' just war theory is hugely influential, and a lot of it was derived from Aristotle's opinion on what a just war is. It also, both sides, both the Spartans and the Athenians, actually do value a lot of other stuff, principles which they didn't actually name, but often wrote about in consideration. So what we'd see is the Spartan kings would go up and they would basically pray to the gods, seek approval. The Athenians would sort of hold certain meetings to confirm what is good and right, but nonetheless, logic is being used, even in the divine sense. Both states, Sparta and Athens, focus on the idea of just cause, of last resort, of a good chance of success, of proper declaration of war by a legitimate authority figure. So for Sparta, that was its kings with the consultation of the, I guess, holy men within society. And then for Athens, that was certain leaders, imperial advisors, that sort of thing. And this is something that both Sparta and Athens really value. Once they were leading their respective leagues, so that is the Delian for Athens and the Peloponnesian for Sparta, respectively, it's something which seems to be more consistent in convincing other states to join them in war. They have to come up with a system of codification. They have to come up with certain rules for war. They have to come up with certain justifications for war. While Athens did have more ability to command than Sparta did, perhaps those within its league, both parties, both Sparta and Athens, have to figure out a way to convince other states that it's the right thing to do, that it's good, because neither of them want either a rebellion from the league or an attack against them, just as they're about to mount an offensive against the other side, the other league, as it were, within the Peloponnesian War. Athens saw states, or ordering states to go to war, as a good thing, but it provided proper justification. And there's a lot of difference perhaps between the two, but that is the large similarity, that they both think that honor is a very good thing, that the defense of Greece or Sparta or Athens is the right thing to do because it's the preservation of proper society, of the way society should be, of the way Greece should be. Anyway, just cause, which is also largely employed, might be self-defense. It might be interference with an agreed treaty, protection of colonies, more for Athens' sake, or interference with an ally. And there are a lot of common factors that actually unite these two states in their war ethics, and this is really the most consistent way, over time, to measure the way both city-states adapt. Even though Athens has far more concern with the colonies side of things, has a far larger navy, focuses on economic prosperity, and Sparta focuses more on the, I guess, army culture of protecting its nation. They both focus on protecting their way of life, and the threats that they see to that, the threats to their honor that they see, and the prosperity either economically for Athens or socially, and I guess resource-wise for Sparta. The way that they prevent that is through self-defense, and the things that they see as a threat to that is an attack, is interference with a treaty that upsets the world order, that puts someone at risk. It's the invasion of allied lands or colonies. And so I think that's it. As much as we see them as different, they have a lot of things that unite them in their war ethics, and they actually have a lot of differences, of course, in their culture. But nonetheless, each has a real ethical value. Sparta relies upon militaristic preparedness, of honor, of courage, of duty, of law. And Athens relies upon interest, economic prosperity, honor as well, and actually fear through commanding its allies or its vassal states. So I think I'm going to leave it there. But despite the fact these states are so different, they do have some differences, but they've got a lot of similarities, and a lot of that is the founding of, I guess, the status quo for what is considered general war ethics and just war theory, particularly in the Aristotelian influence. So I'll leave it there before 16 minutes.